I'm Hillary Kane, and I wear a few hats in the Green Party. I'm the national treasurer, but I'm actually also a longtime member of the coordinated campaign committee and have done a bunch of campaign trainings. So apologies to those of you who have already seen this before, but I think that there's obviously a lot of folks who are new to our webinar series here. And I think also, you know, at least for me, sometimes I have to hear the same material over and over again. Each time, you know, having had new experiences, I sort of get, you know, take away something new and different each time. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a presentation on early campaign development. And what this is intended to do is kind of give like a broad overview of, you know, the arc of an entire campaign year, but really sort of focusing more on the early things that you might do, you know, in this part of the calendar year. So assuming you're a 2021 candidate, these are the things that you might be focusing on right about now or have recently done. And certainly if you're thinking about 2022, you are way ahead of the curve. And, you know, this is, I think, giving you, you know, an early roadmap for the kinds of things that you want to be planning and doing, you know, and be getting prepared for sort of late fall and into 2022. So that's that. So the overview is we're going to talk today about setting goals for your campaign, assessing resources, assembling a campaign team, possibly planning kickoff events, which could be a little tricky in COVID times. And because I'm a treasurer, I always want to, of course, include something around finance and budgets. And so we'll talk about that as well. And then just so for folks who may be new to our format here, what I'm probably going to do is talk for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. If you have a really deep burning question in the middle, you know, feel free to either raise your hand or try to throw it in the chat. And maybe Holly, if you could monitor the chat while I'm just talking, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay. And of course, you know, keep yourself on mute while we're doing the presentation, just so that, you know, like barking dogs and, you know, kids and sirens and, you know how it is. We're now all Zoom pros, I think. But I just did, of course, want to do that little housekeeping. All right. So in terms of goal setting, you know, the first thing I like to do is to get people to think about why it is that you're running for office, or, you know, whoever your candidate is, what is the purpose of that run for office? And I think there's several. You know, the most obvious one, of course, is to win, right? So we are a political party that is trying to contest for power in the real world and win offices so that we can actually implement our platform through elected office, right? Like that is the purpose. That is why we're here as the Green Party. It is to run candidates and to win so that we can affect change. And that is great. And I, you know, like, and that's, you know, sort of the gold standard. It is, you know, it's not the only reason though that we run for office, particularly as still a relatively new and small party that's still really gaining traction in a lot of communities. And so some other reasons to run for office could be, you know, to improve your community, of course, right? Like, and that really is obviously related to the platform and the wins and trying to make change. But it, you know, the act of running for office is also a way to sort of start doing some of the things that you want to see. And so I've seen people, you know, during their run for office, you know, hold volunteer events and drives. People are doing mutual aid right now. There's all kinds of things that you can do that's sort of like a more immediate win for your community as you run for office. You know, another reason that Greens run is to bring visibility to a particular issue, whether it's, you know, an environmental issue, which would certainly be very common for Greens, a social justice issue, you know, we've got, whether it's a budget thing in your community, something around school closures, you know, you name it, there's 100 reasons to run, to bring visibility to a particular issue that you think is really getting short shrift by the mainstream candidates. And so in that case, you may not really be expecting to win, but you're expecting to either move the debate in a particular area or at least bring something into the debate, something that may be completely off the table and off the radar screen, but to try to get, you know, your community to sort of take note. And then another reason that I think, of course, is really important is to build the Green Party and to really think about building for the future. And so you might be in a case where you're probably not going to win this year in this particular race, but can you use your race to build the party itself so that it positions us for future wins? And so, and that really is when often we're running at sort of higher levels. I mean, Howie Hawkins would talk about how during his presidential race, like the purpose was to build the party. Certainly when we run for governor or for Senate, things that are a little bit more out of reach, again, often the real purpose is to build the party to sort of seed new locals in new parts of the state that maybe we didn't have them before, and to really prepare ourselves to get the next time out to win a seat. And then the other thing, there's sort of building the name recognition of the party itself, the building the party part, but then also for you personally, as a candidate, you might be running this time around to build name recognition for a future run. And so I worked on a campaign in 2010. Actually, we ran someone for state representative, and he actually started out wanting to run for city council. Like, what his real passion was local issues. But in Philadelphia, where I'm from, our city council districts are actually larger than our state rep districts. And it was also an even number year. It was 2010, and city council didn't happen until 2011. And so we convinced him actually to run for state rep, and to do it almost as a trial run, to sort of, make all the mistakes that you're going to make, the first time out, so that you're better prepared and better positioned for that sort of next larger thing. And I know Siobhan is on the call, she introduced herself as Justin Paglino's campaign manager. Holly and I were talking with Justin this weekend, and, he said very clearly, like, now that he's had one run under his belt, like all the things he wished he had known then, he now knows for this next time. And so a lot of times, running for office is actually practice for the next time you run for office. And it also, you build name recognition. You get treated a different, if you run a serious and quality campaign, your local media will start turning to you for opinions on local issues, even, the year after you run. Like, you sort of become the visible, whether you like it or not, you're in some ways become the spokesperson for the Green Party in your community. And people will turn to you to say, well, what do you think about this? And what would the Green Party have been doing? And so, building that name recognition for both you as an individual and for the party itself is really important. And the reason I want to talk and start with all this is that for me, different goals lead to different objectives and different activities as you plan your campaign. And so decisions that you might be making in April, May, June about how to spend your money and how to spend your time should be influenced by what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. And so I just want to, underscore that, because I think what I have seen very over and over again is people starting with one goal. Let's say I'm going to build the Green Party. And then at some point they mentally shift, and not that your goals can't change. I mean, nothing's set in stone, but they sort of mentally shift. And instead of behaving and sticking to the plan that's going to maximize the building of the party, they instead start shifting to a new plan, which might be maximizing the votes. And they're not necessarily the same thing, right? And so, for instance, might be, if I want to win and it's capable and I actually can win, I might be targeting people who are likely to vote and have a long history of voting, and because they're going to go to the polls on election day and vote. Whereas if I'm trying to build the party, I might be trying to focus in neighborhoods and areas of my community where maybe there's not a deep history of voting, and it's a long-term investment, and it might not pay off in this race, in this run, with a lot of investment in that neighborhood, but it might pay off in the long run. And so I think, like, that's the sometimes difficult choice that we have to make when we have limited resources, because let's face it, as Greens, we almost always have limited financial resources. It's that sort of short term, the win on this election day, or the more long term of building. And it's obviously both and each race is different, but I just want folks to think about, what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish, what is realistic for your particular race and your particular situation, and then how can you sort of do the best at whichever one of these things that you're really trying to do. All right. And there's probably other reasons out there. And if we had a more like in-person discussion, we could do a little more back and forth discussion. I would do that. If you want to put other reasons to run for office in the chat, feel free. That would be great. All right. Not that I'm like a huge proponent of SMART goals, but, again, coming up with a really tight set of goals for your campaign, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and then how can that be sort of quantified and defined a little better will help you kind of stick to a plan for your campaign. And so, a SMART goal for for folks who have not heard of this is it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's results oriented, and it's time bound. And so, as opposed to just like to win, right? Like that's kind of amorphous. And then this is a way to sort of get that more down to brass tacks. And so, for example, if your goal is to win, your SMART goal may look something like, if your goal is to build the party, this is what your SMART goal might look like. So the specific thing might be to grow membership and local infrastructure. So like that's specific, like what does it mean to build the party? Well, it might mean like we have more locals in more places, or we have more people who are registered as Greens in our state, in our county. It might be we have more chapters, like infrastructure. And so measurable, well, how many more? Right? So maybe our goal is 5 new county chapters or 300 new members or 150 new donors, or it's all of the above. But again, giving yourself some targets. How is this attainable? Like, did you have 0 chapters last year or 3? Like, is this something that's realistic within a year? And so, and I think sometimes this is where folks get tripped up, is that they don't necessarily think about, well, I know what I want to get to, but where am I now? And is that a realistic, am I like tripling the volume of activity that we have in 1 year? Is that realistic? Have we ever done that before? What is the purpose? Building a base for future elections. And so maybe that even helps you think about where you want to build these new chapters. Like, is it that you want to build 5 new chapters anywhere in your state, or in a particular, maybe you're going to run for governor to get momentum, build 5 new chapters, but you want to focus those 5 new chapters in a particular congressional district that next year will be up for like that type of thing. And then, what's the deadline? And so in this case, for building the party, I'm just going to sort of make up the end of the year as sort of a, in some ways an artificial, time. We all know that when we run for office, like there is a deadline, there is a sense of urgency that is, the election day. And it's sort of, it's not as much of an ongoing project as the party building itself. This SMART goal example for winning office might be, okay, well, like the specific thing is that we actually want to win county commissioner. Like that's the goal. And in order to do that, that's going to translate. We obviously need at least, we need the majority of votes. And, so like in this particular example, we're going to say estimated at 5,500 votes. Well, is that attainable? Well, previous Green got 3,000 votes. So that seems pretty promising, right? And then, what's the purpose? Of course, is to bring the Green platform to the county level, and the timeline is by election day. So those would be the type of things that, that would be how to take these various goals and translate them into these SMART goals. And I saw in the chat that someone else added for another reason to run for office would be ballot access. Of course, yes. And that, in some ways is a variation on building the party or sort of teeing yourself up for your next race, but that is a specific strategy and a specific reason that I should add to this presentation for the next time. So thank you for that. All right, so the next thing you want to think about is assessing your resources. So, what is it that you have at your disposal and what can you build and grow, right? And so campaigns aren't, developed overnight. It takes, weeks and months of hard work to kind of, build a base of support, grow that base, and bring in, the resources that you need in order to get your message to your new audiences, new voters, new communities, etc. And so, there's all kinds of resources that you'll need. The obvious one is money, right? So financial resources. I know in the Green Party, this tends to be a little touchy sometimes because I think there are folks who believe that, the Green Party way is no money in politics. Not quite. It's no big money in politics, right? We don't want corporate money in politics. We don't want billionaires dictating what happens. But that doesn't mean that we think campaigns should run on $0. I mean, that is just simply not realistic. And so sometimes Greens shy away from raising money and struggle with it a bit. But, I'm here to say, like, you definitely need to raise money. You definitely need to make a plan for raising money. And money itself is not evil or, like something to avoid. If you want to be able to print literature, print signage, possibly buy ads on, whether it's social media or actual television, radio, what have you, all of those things cost money. Just making a nice looking flyer. And so please make a plan for raising real money. Um, but you also need human resources, right? Not everything's going to be money. In fact, Green Party, we have a huge reliance on human capital, on our staff, on our volunteers. Most of our staff are volunteers. It's very rare that we have actual paid staff on campaigns. I mean, it does happen, but it's certainly not by any means, the majority of the time. And so we obviously need to make sure we're having a plan to recruit volunteers, and not just recruit them, but retain them, keep them involved and keep them inspired in the campaign. Infrastructure. So I think this is something that people also don't really think about is, what are sort of the systems and processes that you're going to use to sort of manage all the stuff that goes on in your campaign. It occurred to me at some point that running a campaign is almost like, it's like opening a small business overnight and immediately putting out product, right? Like if you were to even just like open a pizza shop on the corner, you got to buy ovens and you got to figure out like, okay, well, how are we going to buy inventory and who's going to process payroll? And, how do we make sure we fill out all the right forms so that we're, doing sales tax the right way? All that stuff takes time. And campaigns are very much like, it's almost like opening a business and trying to be running it like on day one. And so all that infrastructure, like how are you going to, if you're paying people, well, how are you going to do that? What kind of databases are you using to track who your supporters are? How are you sending out emails? Do you have a website? Your media lists, any other kind of technology? And then also just like, how is it that we do things? Like, are we keeping shared documents in a Google Drive? Are we doing some other thing? Are we meeting as a campaign team every Wednesday at 3:00? Those are the kinds of like infrastructure, systems, processes that all gets invented, and often on the fly. And the hope is if you can make plans and try to sort of set all that out as early as possible, then you're sort of in a better place. And the last thing that, for me is an important resource is, of course, your relationships. It's a sort of a spin on human capital, but it's not just like the individuals, but the actual groups, other organizations that are going to support your campaign, community groups, advocacy organizations, etc. Who is going to possibly endorse your campaign and who can you access to get other key endorsements. So those are some kinds of things that you want to, sit down and really try to have an honest conversation with your key circle of supporters, your sort of inner ring, ideally your local Green Party or your state Green Party. And so, like how much money do you think you can raise? How many people do you think you can bring in? What kind of infrastructure already might exist at the local level in your Green Party that can be shared with your campaign? You shouldn't have to invent all of this on your own. the party should be a resource for you. But some of you might be choosing to run in an area of the country where there just really isn't a local party. And so, every situation is different. But really sit down and try to get a sense of like what you think you can do, knowing that it is a bit of a guess. You're sort of just trying to figure this out. But using, I think, some local parties, local party, leaders who have been around for a few years. What happened? Like, did somebody else run in this seat 2 years ago? How did they do? What kind of money did they raise? How many volunteers, etc. So hopefully your local party, if you have one, is sort of the keeper of that kind of institutional knowledge. And if not, you should be able to find out some of those things through, either your county or state board of elections, whether you're looking at old campaign finance reports, or what, especially for the financial piece. All right, moving on. Other key considerations to think about in the early stages of your campaign. And so, thinking about resources, what's the need, right? And so this is unfortunately sometimes the kind of like, gut check moment, or, like, let's be realistic. And this is just among friends, right? This is not necessarily what I would say to the general news media. But if you're running for governor of pretty much any state, even the smallest state we have, and you think you can raise $10,000, you're probably not going to win the governorship. And that's okay, right? Like, there are other reasons to run for governor that we talked about, right? Whether it's building name recognition, ballot access, getting the Green Party name out there, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, my plea is simply, if like that's the situation that you're in, that you think you're going to have like 50 people and $10,000, that you realize that you're probably not going to win, and therefore that you like pick one of those other really important goals and go hard on that and really like build up the party, so that the race actually makes a difference. And so, just compare your resources with the need, knowing that Greens are never competing dollar for dollar. And we certainly have had candidates that win, even with, what's considered, by the mainstream media to be small amounts of money, but, within reason, right? So we may not have like $10 million in the race, but, there's sort of like orders of magnitude of how far away we are from that sort of traditional marker of what it takes. So, but it's not just the money stuff. It's also about like, how viable, basically how viable is your campaign in terms of, are you running against an incumbent, right? That makes a huge difference. Are you running against an incumbent who has a scandal, right? Like, what are the external conditions that make up your race that may or may not impact, your viability? What kind of money is being spent by other parties? What are some other, like important issues? Are there certain like game changers that come out of left field, like a COVID, right? There's all kinds of things that can impact your race. And having the sense of not only what you can marshal on your own and with your, your key supporters, but also like, so that's the internal. And then what are sort of the external considerations, the external conditions, the context, hot issues, trends. Are there key supporters coming out who are disgusted with the incumbent for whatever reason? All kinds of things are going to impact what the dynamics of your particular race are. All right, so once you've done some of that, and honestly before, because you should not be figuring all this out on your own, you definitely need to assemble a campaign team. While a campaign manager in some ways is the most important thing, treasurer is actually the thing that is usually legally the only thing that you actually really need. And, again, every jurisdiction is different. So let me just sort of like disclaimer is that like, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a campaign finance expert per se, or, I certainly can't pretend to know all 50 states, campaign rules and regulations. I just can tell you that if there's in 50 states, there's 50 different campaign rules and regulations. And then plus the District of Columbia. And then within states, there's different rules and regulations. I know the city of Philadelphia, where I live, has different rules around how you can spend money and what's required versus versus the state. So, first thing is also to like make sure that you know what the rules are and what you need. But in most cases, in most jurisdictions, you need to at least have a treasurer, somebody who's keeping track of the money, and who is responsible for campaign finance reporting. Ideally, you will also have a campaign manager. Ideally, that campaign manager would be a paid position. Certainly, that's a luxury for a lot of, especially in local races in the Green Party. But you definitely want to avoid, if you can, if you're the candidate, not being your own campaign manager. Candidates really have one set of responsibilities, and it's very like visible and outward facing. You're sort of the chief fundraiser. You're the one going, on TV if you can swing it. You're the one putting your face out there. Doing that and also managing like all the nitty gritty minutia of what it takes to run a campaign is a really tall task. And so, it's essentially just too much bandwidth for one person. And so if you're going to be the candidate, you really need to find someone else to help you manage just scheduling, like which volunteers are going where for what purpose, who's doing, all the different aspects of a campaign. It's really, really hard to sort of have your A game, your sort of public face, and being really like, upbeat and perky and selling your vision while also trying to do all of that other minutia. It's really difficult. So very much, get a campaign manager of some kind, even if it's only a few hours a week to help you. Once your campaign gets going and you get more key volunteers in more places, and people want to step up into, leadership roles, or you actually have money and you can stipend and pay people to do things, my recommendation is that your next few things are titles like volunteer coordinator, fundraiser, a media or press liaison, and technology. And then if things really take off, that's when you might consider like an office manager, if you actually have the luxury of having an office, which perhaps in COVID times is a non-thing. But back in the day, I have worked on campaigns. Sherry Honkala comes to mind, where we actually like, ribbon cutting, opened a campaign office. People were there every single day, doing the work of the campaign, and or a scheduler, to help make sure the candidate, knows where they're going and what they're doing at all times. All right, speaking of kickoff events, like a ribbon cutting of an office, this is something that in COVID times is obviously a little different. And so it may not be an event per se in a traditional sense of like, a party or a press conference, but, I think you certainly can do a socially distant press conference. Think about your announcement. Like if you haven't yet disclosed to the world that you're running for office, think about, that is an event, that is a media opportunity. And so, make a statement, have an event in a particular place, right? So if you're going to run for school board, maybe you're going to do your announcement in front of the local public school in your district, or your kid's school, or in front of the school district administration building. If you're, and Justin just comes to mind, if you're running for Congress and your big major issue is, Medicare for all and healthcare, maybe your announcement is in front of a hospital, or it's in front of, if there happened to be a walkout of nurses, who are demanding more PPE, like something that sort of catches the imagination, that links to your campaign, something that ideally humanizes you. And is itself a media event and is an excuse for media to come cover you. Now they may not, and that's okay. And in the Green Party, that's unfortunately something that we have to deal with, is really having to work extra hard to get media attention. But just because the press doesn't come doesn't mean that it can't be still worthwhile from a media perspective, because a lot of what we have to do is we sort of make our own media, right? So we are writing a press release, you're doing a media advisory before the event saying, hey, this event is going to happen. We are filming the event, you know, doing live stream, writing it up as if the news was there and this is the article that they would have written, sending that out as a press release, and then more importantly, putting it up on your own website, putting it up on your own social media. You know, that's the place where people will go to look to see if your campaign is active. Does it seem like it's doing anything? And the campaign website that has multiple events and releases and photos and snippets of video of your candidate saying important things, that's what you want to be achieving. You want to make it seem like there's some there. Of course, you want there to actually be there, right? It's not just seem like, but part of it is by actually doing things and by turning almost every little thing that your candidate does into an event, into something like worth talking about. Whether it's your kickoff, whether it's, you know, later down the road, issuing a statement about something, attending local city council, speaking out against whatever they were talking about, coming up with alternative platform positions or policy proposals, um, you name it. All of that can be press worthy. And so, you know, I remember I worked on a judge campaign here in Pennsylvania. We elect judges in Pennsylvania, and I was supporting someone. I think it was 2017, and we did a, you know, even though he was running for judge statewide, he had previously been elected to his county commission, I believe. And so we did his kickoff in front of the county commission headquarters, the office building, and maybe like 3 people came to this kickoff. I mean, it was like nothing. But we filmed it. We filmed it really tight. It went up on Facebook. It got so many shares and likes on Facebook that, you know, not that it didn't matter that the press didn't come, but we certainly got mileage out of it, more so than A, if we hadn't had it at all, and B, if we had only thought very narrowly about, well, whether the media was going to come or not. And so I just, you know, like, everything is an excuse to, you know, do press releases and media advisories, but then also document it, put it up on your own, you know, publish your own media basically, which is what your website and your social media is for. And it's also the kind of thing that also engages your supporters. It gets people mobilized to do something, whether they're, you know, I'm in charge of the sound system, or I'm in charge of, you know, the invitations, or, you know, the publicity. It gets people, it gives your volunteers something to work on, and it also gives you an excuse to, you know, even knock on doors in the surrounding community, whatever it is. It's an excuse to tell people about your campaign. All right. Other types of early kickoff events that you might want to be doing, obviously fundraisers. You know, I do another training about the arc of a campaign year, and pretty much in every single month, fundraising is part of, you know, like, fundraising is unfortunately something that you're pretty much doing the entire year. You know, again, in normal times, house parties, certainly people are getting very creative, you know, on Zoom and other platforms about how to do social events and other things, you know, virtually. You know, this is the part where you want to lean on your party infrastructure, you know, on your local party, on your state party. They should hopefully be sharing lists with you to sort of help prime the pump, right? Like, the goal, you know, my thought, and, you know, this is probably only one school of thought, is that, you know, candidates usually generate a lot more buzz and excitement than the party itself, right? Very few people are interested in ongoing political parties, but a lot of people get excited about candidates and campaigns. And so ideally, any campaign in some ways builds and expands on the core group that is the ongoing party. And so, you know, your local party is going to be that first, you know, the first few volunteers, your first donors, you know, the people who will sort of get you started. But the goal is to, of course, grow beyond that, right? So, you know, one of our best campaign managers in the Green Party, Lynn Serpy, trained me early on, like, retain your base, build your base, retain your base, build your base. So, like, the retained base, the sort of, you know, diehards who are with us year in and year out, ideally are sort of, you know, party stalwarts. But then we're trying to expand our base. We're trying to grow, and, you know, our influence and our reach. and our campaigns help us do that. And so, but in these early days, you want to lean on that core group. And so the local party should be helping you do these kickoffs, get you, sort of get you started, so that you can then go on to sort of, like concentric circles, get more and more people involved in your campaign. So, if you can pull out, I mean, these days, an office opening may not make sense, but maybe you can like open a virtual office. I don't know, but, be creative. Again, it's a media opportunity. It's, it's another chance for a fundraiser. When we did Sherry's office opening, it was a press conference. We sort of did a ribbon cutting, but then of course we turned it into like a little wine and cheese kind of affair for donors, and to try to get more people to donate. And people got a tour of our office, which at that point was, I think, essentially an empty room with maybe like one computer. Like there was nothing, it was just nothing, because it hadn't really yet been built, but we could certainly talk about our vision for how we were going to get there. And so, don't feel like you have to have everything built and finished before you show it off. In some ways, your campaign is always a work in progress, and inviting people in to participate in the building of that thing, whatever it is in some ways part of the appeal. All right. I think this is the last thing I want to talk about. And then I would like to have like a more open conversation. I know there's a lot been going on in the chat, which is great, but, developing a budget is really important. What I often recommend to candidates is develop a 3-tiered budget, sort of a low, medium, high, right? And so it might be like, all right, if we only raise $2,000, this is what we're going to spend money on. If we can raise $7,000, this is how we're going to spend it. And if we can raise $15,000, this is how we're going to spend it. To just give your, a sense of like where, what's possible with more money, which helps motivate you to try to raise more money. But it also just sort of gives you a sense of like, you don't want to be constantly aiming for, that high budget and not making it. And then you haven't been able to actually run the best sort of low budget campaign you can, if that makes sense. And so, these are some examples of the kinds of things that you might need to spend money on. Again, every campaign is different. But know that, these are the types of things, these are categories that you want to keep in mind. A budget is really just a plan. It's not written in stone, particularly at least for a campaign. But, it is good to have that plan. It does help you. It helps you also work with the end in mind. So like, again, back to those goals at the very beginning, right? Am I trying to have 75 volunteers covering 30 polling places on November 2nd? Okay, well, how are we going to get that? What is it going to cost? What kind of materials are those people going to need? How are we going to, like sort of working backwards from November? What is it that you're going to need, and how can you budget for that? If you're party building and you're trying to build 5 new locals in 5 counties, well, are we going to have events in those 5 places? Again, in normal times. In normal times, events cost money. In COVID, on Zoom, not so much. But what's the plan? What do we need to do? And how does that then sort of feed into our budget? And then of course thinking like, well, how much do these things cost? And right, and that takes research, right? So, if you're brand new at this, you're not necessarily going to know what it costs to put up yard signs. But the good news is that, somebody has done this before you, whether it's in your own local or another part of your state, or even at the national level. We have many people who have done this before, and you do not totally have to, invent the wheel in terms of thinking about what these things cost. All right. So as I said, a budget is a plan. I think it also, I like to think that a budget helps you avoid dumb decisions in the moment. So sometimes people come up to you, particularly when you're the candidate, and they're like, oh, we have this really great thing, and you should, if you just give us like, $500 to advertise on this one radio station, like it'll be so impactful. It'll be like amazing. And, maybe that radio station doesn't hit the market you're trying to cover. Maybe, just if your whole budget is $2,000, 500 just isn't really worth it for a radio advert, like whatever. And so, sometimes people are sort of very in the moment, and they're like trying to give you like this, sales pitch to make a decision that you maybe doesn't make sense. And so your budget can give you some cover and say, well, you know, that just like, thank you, that's a great opportunity, but that just wasn't really in our budget for this year, or for this campaign. Then again, campaigns are dynamic and fast moving, and you know, the situation is constantly changing. So again, the budget is not set in stone, it can change, but just keep that in mind so that when you do make those decisions, you know, it is coming from a, you know, you've done some thinking and some reasoned analysis about why that that expense makes sense. um, and I think it also shows donors you're serious, you know, like that you've got a plan, that A leads to B leads to C, and that even if your budget isn't gonna, even if you're not gonna win, you're gonna get some win out of it. You're gonna meet the goals that you set at the beginning. And I think a lot of donors, like they want to see that, and it will help. I think will help also, you know, with your fundraising. Um, Definitely keep in mind, you know, all kinds of timelines and deadlines around not just like finance stuff, but everything, right? So yes, you have campaign filing requirements and reporting requirements. Make sure those deadlines are not missed. That is a big no-no. Plus, it just makes us look bad, right? Like, you know, here we are, Green Party, good government, trying to say, you know, we can do it better than those guys. If we can't even meet, you know, basic deadlines, that is not a good look for us. As somebody mentioned in one of our state, you know, chats, you know, even if you don't have all the information, always file on time. You can always amend it later. And so even if it's not totally ready to go, just get it in on time and then go back and amend if needed. You know, you also want to make sure you have a timeline and a plan around your goals and milestones. Like by when will you have raised the first $1,000, or by when will you have, you know, found 20 volunteers to do your ballot access drive? You want to think about, you know, earned media that you can plan. And so earned media is the term that we use for essentially what's like free advertising, meaning that you have earned it because you've done something newsworthy, as opposed to having to pay for it. You know, think about when your events might happen over the course of the year. And if you need to, you know, a weekly or daily work plan, to really make sure that you're sort of sticking with it. You know, in an ideal world, running for office is a full-time job and then some, right? I think, you know, many candidates I've talked to put way more than 40 hours a week in. For a lot of people, that's just not realistic, you know, especially those of us who have actual day jobs, right? But that doesn't mean that if you're not doing it, and you know, if you structure your night and weekend time appropriately, you can still accomplish an awful lot. But you know, it helps to have that sort of structured and planned, and to, you know, to be disciplined and think, okay, like this is the time where I'm going to do my campaign work. And also to think about, well, do I have to take time off from work at certain points in the campaign year? Do I need a leave of absence? Whatever the case may be. All right, so here is your overall to-do list. It's a lot. um, don't let it scare you. You know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But, you know, like these are the big buckets of work. And, you know, it, like having a plan and a thought for each of them is really important. Having a point person so that you're not the one who's trying to manage and think and invent all of this, but that you've got folks helping you with each of these things. Um, so I think that's it. I think that's like sort of my broad overview, really focusing more on the early stuff. Yep, that's the last slide. So I am going to stop sharing, and folks can be, feel free to take themselves off of mute, or at least selectively. And I know there was a lot going on in the chat, so I don't know if people had questions that haven't gotten answered, but I would love to have a conversation and hear from folks, and, you know, try to keep it brief because we're already at 9:49, but yeah, that was it.
Can I butt in here?
Yeah, Holly.
Thank you. This is really a good overview, and you could go into, just be aware any of these, a lot of these topics are things that in the campaign school you go into and spend a good hour or two going into in more depth, but this really gives you all the topics that you need to think about. I do want to mention one thing, and this is going to sound contradictory, but it isn't. when progressives were starting to run for office and look into electoral work, this is long ago, of course, they were thinking of actually winning the office and then noting side products and side benefits, such as ballot access and building a community and other goals they wanted to do. If you're running for office, you need to be serious about what you would actually do if you really won that office, no matter how high it is and no matter how unlikely it is that you might win it. I have heard back from media and other parties, people expect Greens to know what they're talking about. That doesn't mean you have to be an expert on every issue, but if you have a particular issue that you're fluent in, that's what you want to highlight, and you want to run like you really, if you won, that you really could manage the job. If it sounds too much to the public, like you're simply running because you have the right to run and we have the right to be on the ballot and we should be on the ballot no matter what because I want to just run a candidate, you start to lose credibility, and you don't want to do that. It doesn't take much to retain that credibility, but just keep in mind that you're running for the community, you're running to win, and the byproducts, of course, you want to run in a way that will help build a community, to help build a party, and all these other goals. And so, of course, these other goals are wins that people begin to realize were very important. But I want to put it in that context so people realize when they do run, especially for higher offices where we don't expect to win, that the better you know at least one or two items, the more credible you are. And that goes a long way and is a benefit not just for you and your campaign, but actually that does trickle down, I think, to the party. I mean, one of the best things I heard about Jill Stein was that she was about ready for prime time, which sounds pretty low key. But where I live, that's like a big deal. It was like, wow, this is great. We don't expect third party candidates to sound like they know what they're doing or to really be ready to win. And when we had candidates running here for governor and lieutenant governor, we were all asked, okay, lightning strikes, bus runs over enough people and you win. What are you going to do? How are you going to actually work? And they really wanted to know. So it's a good exercise. You know, it could happen. Probably not, but it could happen. But just wanted to say that. And the other thing we were talking about, and I think we do have a website called Treasury 101, which I think will be coming up. Or I'm sorry, webinar, Treasury 101. And both Hillary and I have been Treasury, she's the treasurer for the National Party, but both of us have done campaign treasury. And so it's not that difficult, but we do have a webinar on that and would invite everybody to go through. I think what Sue and others have put out, start with the IRS. And
yeah,
when I first did it, I went to the bank and didn't know what I was doing, and the bank told me what I had to do. So that was lucky, but sorry, go ahead. So I should be done.
I was going to put the treasurer PowerPoint in the chat for the Google Slides, and folks can, if you can't access it, just let me know and I'll give you permission. And we might have a recording of that on our website. If you go, and I'll put that in the chat as well. This is being recorded, and all of our previous calls for like several years now are on our coordinated campaign committee website or the page on gpus.org. And if you go to the webinars section, sort of like in date order, in reverse date order. I did see in the chat that someone was asking about like the mechanics of just opening a bank account and all that. At least in my experience, the general sort of order of business is you fill out your you have to, in most states, and again, every state is different. So let me just, I don't want to give false information, but in my experience, there's some kind of paperwork that you have to fill out with either your state or county that essentially like creates your committee. And your committee is like, Hillary Kane for president, or Friends of Hillary Kane, or Hillary Kane 2021, or whatever you want to call yourself, like the legal entity that is your campaign. And so here in Pennsylvania, it's basically a form that like lists the candidate's name and address, the campaign chair, I think is what it's called. It's not necessarily campaign manager, but it's sort of like another person who's sort of like, on the hook, and then the treasurer. And like that gets signed, usually notarized and submitted. And then you take that documentation, then you go to the irs.gov, as I saw, and get an EIN number, which takes about 30 seconds online. And then you take your EIN and your copy of your campaign committee filing statement, and you take that to the bank. and then you sit there and you convince the person who's never seen that paperwork before that that's a real thing. Because they're basically looking for like articles of incorporation, or like you're sort of opening a business account but you're not really a business, and like they're like, where are your bylaws? There are no bylaws on the campaign. Campaigns are not democracies. It's not like the party. And you just keep explaining this, and eventually somebody's like, oh, and they open a bank account for you. um in my experience, I go back to like the local credit union. Now they know me, like I've opened up several campaign accounts there. But you know it does take yeah, I mean, it depends. Like I've definitely had experiences where banks get it, and then I've had other experiences where they're just like really scratching their head and not sure if it's like an individual account or a business account or whatever. Typical salaries for campaign treasurer or campaign manager. I don't know, and I don't think there is. I mean, certainly, like the range is everything from like 0 to 1 million, right? Like, what, like, corporate Democrats and Republicans are paying their people, I think would make all of our head spins. I think, in the Green Party, I've seen $500 a week. I've certainly seen less. I've seen more depending. Obviously, like we're sort of in that tough spot of like not having loads of money. But also, we support workers' rights and $15 an hour and living wage and healthcare, like all these things. And it's very hard for us to, provide all that. Yeah, $20 an hour, right, Dave? And so I think, it's really a negotiation. And sometimes, what we often have is people who are in some ways quasi volunteers and they're partially paid, right? Like they're clearly getting paid less than what this job is worth, on the market, so to speak. But they got to eat, they got to do something, and so they're like, they're essentially volunteering a lot, but you're giving them some kind of stipend just to make sure they can pay their rent. So, it really is a judgment call, but I would say, you know, I would aim for at least a few $100s a week. Um, but ideally, ideally like close to a real salary, particularly knowing that, you know, you're probably going to be paying people as 1099s, not necessarily setting up, like payroll processing. I mean, that's like a big undertaking. And so, knowing that people have to then like handle their own withholding, they're not getting benefits, like, you know, you can certainly justify more. Um, Another question I'm seeing: how do candidates get paid, or do they not? That I believe is really a jurisdiction by jurisdiction thing. So in my experience, generally speaking, candidates do not get paid. That is totally a volunteer thing. Though I believe at certain levels for certain offices, one can draw a salary or a stipend. There's also really varying things about what's like reimbursable and allowable. And I remember particularly since I worked with Sherry a couple of times, um, you know, when she ran for sheriff, which was the city office, we were, I think we were not, the city had stricter rules. So things like if she needed childcare, and some of this was totally like gendered, and structural issues, and, like how, working women are supposed to ever run for office in this country, or low income women in her case particularly. But things like if she needed a babysitter to go to a campaign event, like that was not a reimbursable expense. But when she ran for state office, certain things were allowable. And so it really just depends, whether or not like is wardrobe, right? And obviously within reason, because like things may be allowable, right? Like if she needs a suit to go to an event, great. But then you hear, like the stories of like Hillary Clinton's like, $10,000 suit, like you just, like we're obviously not at that level, but just always be mindful of sort of the optics and how things look. But then again, people have real needs. And particularly if they don't already have their, closet full of professional attire, that can be a real campaign need. So, but it's really, every jurisdiction has different rules about that sort of thing. Yes, Gloria's talking about the childcare, what it's like to run as a working mom.
Mhm, mhm.
All right, any other comments or questions? Any current candidates out there? I know Savon's working on Justin's campaign, who's 2022. Yes, if you win, the candidate does get paid. Unless, but you know, depending if they're running for like a really small office in a small community, you know, like being elected tax collector in rural Pennsylvania, I think gets you a salary of nothing. So it depends. But yes, if you win like, you know, something major, you're basically getting a job, right? You know, a salary.
Yeah, I mean, where I'm not in the rural area of the state, but I'm in a more rural part of the country. And generally, people are running for offices in the third party, they just don't have the money and don't expect to be paid. But you also aren't working. You may work a lot, but you're not working the 40-hour a week, and you're not doing the consulting and the stuff that it would be taking away so much that you would really need that money. But so you really need to look at where you're running and what you're going to need to. But I've also heard that, you know, when you figure out your budget, don't just try to raise money and then see how far you get. Plan what you're going to need and ask for it, and you'll get it. The person who said that actually was good at doing it. So, so you want to have an idea, goal in your mind when you start out.
Yeah. And speaking of, you know, ask for it. This is not the fundraising call, but if you are a candidate, this is your biggest fundraising tool. And you're going to go at the very beginning of your campaign and you're going to go to your contacts list and you're going to find 100 people in your phone that you know that will give you $100 each. And I guarantee, like, you can do it. You just have to try. And that's $10,000 if you do that math. And everyone's like, oh no, I can't raise money. Well, a lot of times people don't ask. They are afraid to ask. They're like, oh, but my crazy uncle is like a super conservative Republican. He's never going to give me money. Garbage. If you ask, I mean, like maybe not, but like in my family, you know, my very Republican in-laws would give me money because they like me. And even though they don't care for my politics, they would still give me money if I asked. You know, your barber, your kid's babysitter from 5 years ago, like just ask. You know, you just have to get out of that, like, I'm embarrassed, I'm awkward, I haven't seen you in 3 years. It doesn't matter. Like, imagine the role was reversed. Imagine that your former babysitter said, I'm running for office. Would you give me $50? You'd probably be like, yeah, maybe. I mean, unless you really hated them. And so, you know, just like train yourself to ask for money. And I'm telling you, go through your phone and find 100 people and ask them for $100. For some, that might be a stretch. That's okay. They can give you less. And you will start off your campaign with more money than you think you can raise. All right. Well,
Thank you. I'll just notice in the chat a couple of resources. Unofficial ones and official ones. There's the MAP project, Turbo Kitty or Marjorie does a lot of Twitter. And of course the Green Party Media. We want to promote candidates. And if you just want to write ccc@gp.org, that gets to us. And we put you on our spreadsheet and figure out ways to blast information all over the place. So thank you. Thank you all for coming.
good. And so, yes, if you email ccc@gp.org, it goes to both myself and Holly. We're always happy to answer questions and connect you to potential resources. You know, certainly reach out to your own state party, your local party, and to each other. And so, you know, hopefully we're going to be building more of a community of candidates who can support one another throughout the year. You know, I noticed, Tina, you said you're interested in 2022. I think this is the first time that we've had like a critical mass of people who are really thinking like a year ahead. You know, I know in an odd year like this, there's not elections in every part of the country. Here in Pennsylvania, it's a local year. But you know, with Justin, with Kenneth Mejia in California, like there's already a group of candidates who was sort of like, you know, getting really ramped up and, you know, putting together professional campaigns a year a year or two out, which is exciting.
So one question, when are the webinars on the next webinar?
Oh, so typically we've been doing them on the 4th Tuesday of the month. I believe, Sivan, I don't know if you want to come off camera, you don't have to. But I believe we're going to have Sivan and Justin, who Sivan is Justin's campaign manager. I believe they're going to be our March speakers, and we're sort of, I think, still narrowing down what the exact topic is going to be, but something I think around the campaign manager role specifically. And also just, lessons learned, what it was like to run as a congressional candidate, and how he is gearing up already for 2022. So that is a sneak preview, I think, of our March offering.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. After seeing this webinar, it was so fantastic and really all encompassing. So we might need to Justin and I might need to go back to square one in our planning, but we're really excited to be part of this group. So thank you for inviting us.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes, and we would love, if you have expertise, if you've done this before, if you think there's, something that you really excelled at in your campaign, fundraising, ballot access, volunteer management, social media, graphic design, whatever, like we're always looking for other people to lead these calls. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to know more than the people you're talking to. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, we would love to have more folks who could lead some calls. And so please just be in touch. Everyone who registered for this call should now be flagged in our database as like CCC webinar. And so when we advertise the next one next month, you should already be getting the emails, unless you've unsubscribed. And that's it, I think. So I'm at least, we can keep chatting. I'm going to stop the recording.